Okay, today we're going to talk with Louise Pelletier Dupuis. Her name gets confused many, many times and people call her by her maiden name. But anyway, Louise has lived here decades. So she's going to tell us a little bit about early years, Louise, that you can recall. But first tell us how your family came to be in Nipigon.
Well, I always refer to my family as a typical, we're the real Indigenous people of here. We just are. My mother, her family goes back to the beginning of time from here. They did not migrate here. They were new here. So that happens. That's definitely one point about it. But my father, he came from Quebec, the Montreal area, but his family came to Canada back in the 1600s. So we've had it traced back both ways. So anyway, he came here to work in the bush camps back in the old days, and so that's what he did for a living. Was he worked in the bush camps, and but then by the time he was working when we were children, I don't have vivid memories of him being away for weeks on end. I remember the odd time, and I'm sure my mother would probably say things differently because she would have been the one living it. As children, I don't remember him being gone a lot, and he was a very important part of my life. So he was one of those fathers who was very, very important in my life. So, but anyway, so he worked in the bush when we were growing up.
So how many in your family then, Louise?
There's six of us. The three of us still live in Nipigon, and I have two sisters in Thunder Bay and one in Southern Ontario. But we're just truly Nipigon people.
Right.
My brothers are very involved in the community and have been all along as well. So
tell us a little bit about memories of school for you then when you were young, if you've got any.
Yeah, well, I went to St. Edward's School, and we started school when we were 6 years old. I can vividly remember walking to school. I can remember that. That was back in the day when we could cross the tracks.
I was going to say.
We could cross the tracks, and we lived. But anyway, I remember that, and we would go into a class with... I believe there was about 34 of us in a class. I could still picture it. I can still picture us being in rows in my mind, and I can still picture a lot of the kids. I can remember that. I think her name was Miss Humanicki. I think.
Yes.
Yeah. My husband, him and I. That's when we would have met because we went to school together since we were in grade 1. And anyway, I believe her name was Miss Humanicki, and the principal at the time was Mrs. Vino.
Right.
And Mrs. Vino had the deepest voice, and I remember kids back in the days. That was days of, I don't know if the term is corporal punishment or not, but anyway, many a child was very afraid to go to the principal's office, and she had the loudest, scariest voice ever. But the thing is, it was kind of interesting about us kids in those days. You sat in these rows. And I've had this discussion countless times where we've said, I think things were different. We all came from big families. I think the discipline in the home was different. The home life was different. It was quieter. And even though there was loads of children, there was order. Because if you didn't have order, it would have been utter chaos. Because there were so many children.
Right.
So we would go to class and start at 9 o'clock. And you didn't get out of your seat until recess, and then you came back from your 15 minutes of recess and you didn't get out of your seat again. I don't recall kids going back and forth. I don't recall asking to go to the bathroom. You know what I mean? You probably went when you went, but anyway, and you sat in those desks and you didn't get out of those desks.
Right. But it never really bothered anybody.
No, that was just the norm.
That was the norm.
Right. Yeah, and so that was kind of cool. Then we'd walk home for lunch. And then I remember we had a TV. We got a TV in the late 50s, and at lunchtime sometimes we could watch a little bit of TV, and it would be mind you, I shouldn't say that I started school in the early 60s, but we did have a TV already, and I remember sometimes at lunchtime watching the Three Stooges at lunchtime, and then running like heck back to school again,
right.
and. But there was a few different things back then. Like I said, after, as I got a little bit older, Mr. Rhodes was the principal. And he was very, very involved with the kids. Right. And I remember going to his house. Helen was always great with crafts and doing candle making and doing those things after school,
right.
After hours. There was also 4-H. Back in those days, right. And I remember Lila Manella did it. Bill Millen's wife, I remember going to her place. Right. Yeah, I remember going to her place, and I also remember Dorothy Nickel.
Right.
And we learned a lot from those things. There was cooking, there was sewing, there was different things like that we learned through 4-H by all those volunteers. And of course, Girl Guides and brownies. Right. I was the kind of kid that joined all those things, right. And so yeah, it was fun.
Right, it was a busy time. But when you're talking about the Rhodeses, I was always amazed how much volunteering Helen did. In the school and at the hospital, right? And I always thought she didn't get accolades for all of the crafty things that her and Jerry did with children.
Oh, for sure. And that's something that's on that note. We'll have to talk about that because they should be recognized for all the work. And they've just been givers their whole lives.
Yes.
So yeah, sure. So he was our principal, and then I graduated from St. Ed's in 67. No, 68, because in 67, that was Centennial Year. And that was a big deal. And that's where I was really glad. I think it was the Girl Guides. Glenna, you were Girl Guides at the time. And I remember we all got those gowns made, and I was on the parade, the Fall Fishing Festival parade, and I could still picture my outfit.
Yeah.
But everybody did. My mother worked at the Bay at the time. Right. And they all wore those outfits as well.
The bank, I remember, for months they had those outfits.
Yeah, on. So we dressed like that. I thought that was pretty cool, that we did all those things. Yeah. But in our years of school there, we didn't go on big trips. Our big trip was to go to Thunder Bay. But growing up then, and maybe I don't know if I'm representative of every kind of family, but we only went to Thunder Bay a couple times a year.
Right.
It was a big deal to go to Thunder Bay. So when we went on our grade 8 graduation trip, I can still remember Betty Sweats. Remember Betty Sweats? Yeah. She made us all these green and white beanies. We wore green and white beanies. They were the colors of St. Edward's School. And our big thing was we stayed at I think it was the Blue Swan Inn on Kingsway Drive there. We stayed 1 or 2 nights, I can't remember that now. And we went, I remember going to the radio station and a couple of little things like that. And then on the way back, we stopped at Wild Goose Park for a picnic. So that was the extent of the kind of stuff. I mean, later on, people did more and different things. But for us, that was a big deal because going to Thunder Bay was not the norm.
And the year, Louise, that I taught grade 8 at St. Ed's for Roland when he had mono, I was the first one ever to take a class to Duluth.
Yeah, and
we went for a whole week to Duluth. Yeah. And they still remind me of that, those students that were in there. But it was a lot of fundraising and it was a lot of red tape. And I think back now, I wonder how I even remembered to do all of those things. But you're right, they were big trips.
They were really big, So,
but going to Thunder Bay was a big deal. And I can remember Jerry Rhodes taking his class to the Boy Scout camp. Yeah. And I took the girls to the Girl Guide camp. That's right. And that was a big deal.
That's right.
In those days.
And it was, like I said, I know where I grew up down in Duluth Street, down in that end of town, and you barely ventured beyond there. There was enough kids that you didn't need to. You kind of hung around with those kids. Maybe you made a new friend when you went to school, but those are the kids you didn't go all over town.
Right.
You stayed in that end of town, and that's where you played.
Yeah.
And there was no such thing as calling and going in. We didn't go into each other's houses, maybe the odd time, because the houses weren't big and there was lots of children. We
Right.
would be outside
All the time.
constantly. And then back in that day as well, there'd be the siren would go at 9:30 and all the kids would run home. Everybody would run home at 9:30. And
Do you think anybody ever got picked up for being out after 9 o'clock?
I don't know, because I wouldn't be one that would have been out. I would be in the house at that time
Yeah.
as well,
Yeah.
And yeah, it was. I thought it was a great place to grow up. There was lots to do as well if you wanted to do anything. I was one of those that always liked to have jobs, though. I like working, and from the time I was a little kid.
Well, you've got an amazing work ethic.
Exactly.
Louise,
and
you
and
do.
my sister Linda and I, even in grade school, we went to go and see the Ruches. Jerry and Peggy Ruche were the janitors at the school. And I don't know how we came across this. And so my sister Linda and I would stay after school and sweep the classrooms, clean the boards, and this is grade school. And then March break, we'd go in there and work for the whole week and clean. And we were kids, and we just liked it. And I liked working. And so when we became teenagers, I always worked at Daisy's. Daisy hired people young to go work there. And I was working there. Linda probably did too. Then she went to work at Cassidy's. But anyway, and then when John Pazook opened Trader John's, that restaurant thing there, I was one of those kids that kind of hung around there anyway, because all the kids hung around on Main Street when I was a teenager. So I got a job there too. So I always worked. I liked working. Right. And because that way you could be out, you're making money, and anyway. But back in the day, in those early years, what would happen here, there was Daisy's Restaurant. And of course, I'm sure people have been talking about Daisy's Restaurant. Well, at 7 o'clock on a Friday night, it would be packed on the front of the street there. I'm sure every teenager in town went there. And you just kind of hung out for a bit and whatever. Like, we were young still, so we probably had to go home shortly after, but that's what you did. And then as you got older, you still did it, and then you'd kind of meet up with kids and whatever and do whatever, and
We've not had anybody mention about the theater, though.
Oh, the theater.
The theater must have been a big part.
It was.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. See, back in those days as well, the theater, the big deal was the midnight show on Sunday nights.
Yes.
Okay, and I can remember as a teenager wanting to go to the midnight show. Now, first of all, I don't know how I got permission from my parents to go to the midnight show. I don't know what I did to get this permission, because it's a Sunday night. School's next day, or maybe it was a summertime. But anyway, regardless, and you had to be 18, I think, to go to the midnight show. And I can still remember the one time I went, sitting in the back row, thinking, okay, if I get kicked out, it won't be too embarrassing, because it was the midnight show and it was the big deal. And so anyway, but no, Saturday night show, Friday nights, big deal. Yeah. I don't recall going during the week when I was young, but Friday nights was a big deal. Of course, all the first dates were probably going to the show on a Friday night, and again, we also grew up then going to the junior hockey games.
Right.
Junior hockey was big. That was a big thing as well. Social.
Junior hockey or the Flyers, which?
Flyers are before my time.
Oh, they are.
They're before my time.
So
I don't remember the
junior.
Flyers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
But no, junior hockey was big for us at that time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was a great place to grow up. It was every opportunity. The high school was good. Mind you, there was 3,500 people back in those days.
Yeah.
And again, the Fall Fishing Festival was big. It was a big deal. Otherwise it was just school.
Right. And I even think the train was a big part. The Canadian train coming here was a big, interesting thing for lots of people to travel by train.
It's funny you say that. When we were kids, our big thing would be on an evening. We didn't have a camp or anything like that, so we'd go on picnics. We'd go on plenty of picnics. We'd go. My dad didn't have a boat at the time or a camper. We didn't do any of that. There's 6 children and 1 car, and so we would go and we'd go to what do you call it? Cameron Falls there, Alexander. And we'd go down there as a family and sit on the rocks and fish and have a picnic and whatever. Go to 5 Mile Park. That was another thing.
Yeah.
But even when we were kids, I do remember this vaguely. They used to rent cabins at Polly Lake. And I can remember going there, renting a cabin. My family would rent a cabin. I think a few times they happened. And we'd do that.
Because they had the little store there, too.
Yeah, I don't remember the store,
store.
but I do remember the cabins vaguely.
Right.
I was quite young. But then I do remember because we would go for drives. That would be what we would do as a family. So my dad would come home from work and we'd have dinner and then we'd all hop in the car and go for a drive. And anyway, and then we'd go to River 6 on the corner where the bank is now, and we'd get a 5-cent ice cream cone. That was a big deal. Or we might go for a drive and go pick strawberries on the big, where the old lookout was. There's lots of place up there to go pick strawberries. That was kind of what we did as a family with my parents. But the one thing, when you say the train, I don't know why I remember this. I remember sometimes my dad would park the car and we'd see people come off the train. Because passengers would come on and off that train. And that's kind of what we would do.
Entertainment.
Yeah, because life was simple.
Yeah.
It was just simple and quieter. And that's what we do.
Did your family do blueberry picking?
Oh, definitely. I hated it as a kid. I hated it because you're one of those, you have to you go down 81 back in those days or whatever. And the roads are like this to go back there. And I was one of those kids that got car sick all the time. And so I'd be in the back seat with my bag and whatever. But anyway, I always had little siblings. And so I'd say to my mom and dad, I'll babysit. No, baby, I go, but I would watch the baby, whatever. But yeah, it was good.
I think lots of people did lots of blueberry picking back in those days. And and you mentioned the strawberries. I can remember there being more little wild strawberries.
Oh yeah,
you'd
only get a cupful. You only get a cupful, and then go home and have them with milk, and that'd be what you'd have,
And I don't see very many of them today.
No, you're right.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
Raspberries too.
But see, I came from a big family. My mother's family is all here. So there's always lots of cousins and so there was always a lot of people around. And
so again, your family was close. You had a lot of family.
Yeah, we have a lot of family. You always had a couple of cousins that were your friends. Like my uncle lived in Red Rock, so the big deal was to go stay in Red Rock for a week in the summertime.
Oh.
That was a big deal. And
So your mom had sisters here.
My mom has all her sisters are here.
All sisters, yeah.
Yep, they all were here. They all stayed. Only 2 sisters moved away to the Sioux, but the rest of them all stayed right here.
So you had lots of family.
Lots of family around, yes,
Right,
yeah.
right.
And but still, probably still the tightest with my own, because we have such a big family. Yeah.
And there's 2 Pelletier lines, because isn't one spelt different than the other?
Yes, and we don't. I haven't found a link
Oh.
between us. I only, we're the 2 L's ones, and yet they lived across the street from us later on in life.
Did
Yeah,
they?
I must put in there that one of my good friends growing up was, because he lived across the street from me, was Alan Hackner. If we want to get a little bit of notoriety, and he went to school together with us all through school too.
Okay, we're going to stop for that first 20 minutes. Okay, so we'll continue talking, and we're going to move on now, and Louise is going to tell us a little bit about getting into business.
I've been one of those people that always wanted to go into business. Now, I married a boy I went to school with when we met, like I said, when I was 6, and we married at 19. And we had our children right away, and I wanted to be an at-home mom. That's what I wanted to do, and so I stayed home for the full 20 years raising my family, and my husband provided for us very well, and we have 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. I knew that when I did go to work, I wanted to earn good money, because I had my grade 12 high school diploma. I worked in a bank after high school, but after that I was home.
Louise, just comment on which are your children, because when people watch this, they're going to, which Dupuis family is that?
Okay, my children it's Jonah Dupuis, who is the local pharmacist for quite a while, and he still comes here a little bit, but he'll probably end up back here, and he has 3 children. My other son is Matthew Dupuis, and he's around here as well. He's also been the chief of the Red Rock Indian Band. My daughter that lives in Canada is Nicole Dupuis, and she lives in Nipigon. At the time, she's not married. And my other daughter is Christy Dupuis Lepich. She left in 1998 to go backpacking in Australia. And nothing against my son-in-law, but unfortunately, she met someone there. So that's where, and she has 3 children as well. And,
And
she
your
still has
husband's name?
is Ray Dupuis.
Ray Dupuis,
And
right.
he's Raymond and Clara's oldest son.
Right. Okay, that's good because there's a lot of family in there, so people need to know the
Right.
connection. Okay.
And anyway, so anyway, then I stayed home and to raise the family. But then when I knew that I wanted to go to work one day, which I was really chomping at the bit to do, I went back to school when I was 33, and to become a chartered general accountant. And I got my first job when I was 40 at the plywood mill as the assistant accountant there, which was the job I always had my eye on. In the meantime, we almost bought 2 different businesses because I've always wanted to be a business person. My husband doesn't come from the same cloth as me. He doesn't have the same passion as I do when it comes to business, even though he was self-employed almost his whole working career. But anyway, so then I ended up getting that job I always wanted at the mill. And then I went on to become the accountant there. And then the year before, unfortunately, the mill burnt. I was one of the partners that bought the mill. I was one of the shareholders, so I was their first financial manager and whatever. And anyway, so that was a sad day, unfortunately, and I'm sure we've heard a lot about that in this whole thing. On one note of that, the day of the fire, I was doing our very first month end. Everything was in place. I was doing the very first month end, and I was so excited because I'm a numbers person. But anyway, I was excited to get those final numbers. But meanwhile, the mill is burning around me. And meanwhile, at first it started where it's like, okay, the fire started in the lathe area, and okay, so my manager comes to me and says, okay, Louise, we're going to have to get our logs peeled here, and okay, whatever, and then we go on, and finally he comes and he says, Louise, I think we're going to lose it, the whole thing. And anyway, so meanwhile, Matthew Snow, he comes up to me, and he's he was one of the foremen. He comes up to me, Louise, we got to get out. You got to get out. But at least I had the foresight at the time to say, okay, let's get the servers out of here. Let's get all that out of there. And unfortunately, we lost it all. Now, fortunately, the fall prior to this happening, my brother Pierre, he came up to me and talked to me about buying a gas station. And at the time I said, well, that's cool. Yeah, I guess so. We could do a little part-time thing. It was not very busy. It was just a small thing. I did the numbers for it and said, yeah, that looks good. Okay, I'll work with you and I'll be partners with you on this. And so meanwhile, we bought the gas station in April. Yeah, it was the spring, I guess, April. And the following February, the mill burnt. So basically, I was working for the mill for that first year. Because of being in finance, I had to close everything out. I was the last one to go with it, except for the 2 major shareholders. And then I concentrated then on bringing Pelletier's Gas Bar and Native Art Gallery to where it is today. I was in Thunder Bay for that fall that the mill burnt, and I realized I was living there Monday to Friday, and I realized that wasn't for me. I was not going to commute back and forth to Thunder Bay to work. I was not going to get an apartment there, come home weekends. It wasn't going to happen. So I knew I was going to stay in Nipigon to work, and so then I concentrated totally, because we had other people running the place at the time, concentrated totally at running the gas station. And we brought it from a very, very small little non-busy place to, anyone knows it's not like that anymore. And I'm very proud of what we've done there. We've laid the groundwork, I think, to how a First Nations business should could and can run. We have absolutely no staff turnover. People like working there. And so we've had, in our time there, we've had, I believe, one full-time person leave to go to something else. And so I'm proud of that. We've had the business 13 years now. And anyway, so it's good. We help out as much as we can in the community. We support anything and everything that goes on within both communities, the municipality of Nipigon and the Red Rock First Nations.
So just talk a little bit about your crafts, because everybody knows you only deal with Canadian made.
We do. What happened is that we had, in the beginning, a few people would come to me, First Nations people would come through to me and say, oh, can you buy some crafts? And I go, okay, yeah, and it'd be more to help them out.
Right.
I wasn't thinking of going down that road. It just kind of evolved. And before you know it, it was like, oh my goodness, this is really, people are really doing it. But I still do it with the idea of keeping the craft alive. And for these women that I buy from, and men, for many of them, it's their livelihood. It subsidizes their living and whatever. And but one of the cool things about it, I didn't realize how it was becoming until one day I get a phone call from my niece, and she's in the Toronto airport, and she's saying, oh my goodness, I just seen you featured in Style magazine. And I'm going, what? And so sure enough, I got a copy of it, and it was just a small little thing for Christmas saying, if you want to get something unique, go to Pelletier's Gas Bar Native Art Gallery and ask for Louise. And they had pictures of our slippers in Style magazine. So I thought that was really cool. So it's just gotten bigger and bigger. So gradually what I've been doing is bringing in more and more and more of authentic Canadian stuff. We now are home probably to 8 to 10 different local vendors. When I say local, I also mean Thunder Bay, the area, that bring in their handcrafted stuff. And they use us as a venue. They basically get a shelf. I take a very small commission because they're doing me a favor by making my store interesting. Because I'm a gas station.
Right.
But I like to think when you walk into it, you're not like you're walking into a gas station. So it's really coming along well. So that's cool.
Yeah, and it's a good part, because people always comment, if you want something unique and Canadian made, go to Pelletier's.
Yeah, so that's cool.
That's cool. That's for sure.
Yeah. And then throughout all my life, I did always lots of volunteer work, but it was always revolved for the first 20 years around church and my home. And then once my last child left home and I finished a few things and I opened up, I thought, okay, I have time for something else now. So I decided to run for municipal council. And it was interesting when I actually had to do my little thing to run for it. I'm like, I don't know if people know me. And I don't think they did, because all I was ever involved with was work, church, and home. Right. And I was involved in the community. I did little bits. I worked with Father Kennedy, if everyone talks about Father Kennedy, all those years, one of his cohorts, working with the fundraising for the hospital, the arena, the swimming, not the arena, the swimming pool, and Shalander Court. Right. Those ones there, I worked very closely with Father Kennedy those years. But then I did go on council, and I was picked to go on council, and I loved the 4 years I served. I like to think I did things and accomplished things, but then when it came time to run again, I realized that I didn't want to do the actual meetings part. I could be more effective on committee. So I stayed on committee, and I stayed on economic development, museum, and also worked with others to spearhead the Trails Committee to make Nipigon a trails destination. And also the other one that I worked on very strongly was to get the senior citizens apartments built in Nipigon. Yeah. And again, one of those things, I'm very happy to have been part of that team that did that. And my other big baby that I started a little over 5 years ago was the Chalet Lodge, to get the Chalet Lodge up and running again. And we're this close. It's totally been redone, restructured. Cabins are being ready. It's in the process right now of getting it doing the soft launch this summer. So I've truly enjoyed, between running the gas station and my volunteer work and my grandchildren, it's been a really full, rich life. And living in Nipigon, I've been fortunate in the last 15 years to travel all around the world. I've been all places, but having a daughter in Australia, I've been there countless times. I've been to Europe, I've been to Central America, I've been to the Caribbean, I've been to Alaska, all over the world. I come back here and I go, we live in heaven. We are in heaven. And I probably will continue to be Nipigon's Indigenous people till the day I die, because this is home. Right. This is home.
You've lived a full life for sure, and you've taken advantage, Louise, of all the possibilities there are.
Oh, for
There's
sure.
so many people who don't take advantage.
Oh, there's
of
so
those
much
possibilities. And
yeah, and we're so blessed now. Now we have a place on Lake Superior that we bought about 35 years ago, and we actually lived at the lake for 6 years just to try it. And it's only half an hour away, but for me, even though it was beautiful, I'm too involved in the community and too involved with what the town has to offer. I couldn't be a country bumpkin. I just couldn't. I couldn't live that far away. Right. But I settled then, and 10 years ago, we built a place on Cameron Falls Road, which is the best of it all, because I walk into town countless times. I walk to work. I walk a lot, and it's only about three or 4 kilometers out of town, and I'm able to live out there, live in the country, yet have the summer place that you can go to a couple of months of the summer, but still be part of the whole community. I'm currently the president of Rotary, the Rotary Club, and again, what a wonderful, wonderful organization that is. I'm the chair of the board of the CFDC, which is a lending agencies for small businesses, right. And I'm on the investment advisory committee as well. So my life is very, very, very full. I play bridge, which I love to play. I haven't been playing as much because all my old friends that I started with, and you probably have talked to these people, Ann Moore, Peg Thompson, those are the people I started with, and Noreen Bierman, who is still alive right now, and she'll be 96 this summer. Those are my people I started with, and love the game. Don't play it as much as I'd like to, but yeah, Nipigon's a great place to be. There's always things happening here.
Right. And that's a good note to end on, Louise. Thank you.
Right on. Oh, good.